Hello, my name is Rachel and welcome to the News Beyond the Markets, a special show that will get you all the news that matters to kickstart your day. First up on News Beyond the Markets is an update on the recent spread of coronavirus. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian expressed concerns on the latest spread of the virus and said that Sydney is relying on people's common sense to tackle this latest outbreak. She said that they can't control how contagious the virus is, which is why the New South Wales government is introducing new restrictions. She also pointed to the federal government for the slow vaccine rollout. Amid confusion among authorities over the number of new cases, New South Wales Health has issued a press release saying the Bondi outbreak has risen to 31. New South Wales recorded 10 locally acquired cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night, 7 of which were announced yesterday morning. New South Wales Health has also been notified of 30 new locally acquired cases overnight. That's making 31 cases linked to the Bondi cluster. The department says one new overseas acquired case was recorded in the same period, bringing the total number of cases in New South Wales since the beginning of the pandemic to 5,476. Tough new restrictions have been introduced, including limits on guests, masks indoors, even at work, and limited capacity at venues. They'll be enforced from 4 p.m. today and apply to Greater Sydney, the Central Coast, the Blue Mountains, Wollongong and Shell Harbour. Residents of 7 Sydney local government areas are barred from leaving metropolitan Sydney unless essential. On the other hand, Victoria's acting Premier James Merlino has announced major easings of restrictions today. From 11:59 p.m. tomorrow night, public gatherings of up to 50 people outdoors will be allowed. Meanwhile, gatherings in the home will be permitted up to 15 visitors to a home per day, including dependents. Funerals and weddings can move to a cap of 300 people, subject to the density limits of the venue. Meanwhile, New Zealand raised the COVID-19 alert level in its capital Wellington on Wednesday amid concerns that the city may have been exposed to the highly infectious Delta variant. This triggered a fresh outbreak in Australia. Wellington will move to the country's alert level 2, 1 level short of a lockdown, until midnight on Sunday as a precautionary measure to curb any potential outbreak. The move is after an Australian tourist tested positive for COVID-19 on returning to Sydney from a visit to the New Zealand capital over the weekend. New Zealand's COVID response minister Chris Hipkins said at a news conference in Wellington that this is not a lockdown and these precautionary measures will remain in place while the government contact trace the cases. Under alert level 2, offices, schools and businesses can remain open but will have to maintain social distancing rules. Sport and recreation activities are allowed, subject to conditions, including physical distancing, but gathering of more than 100 people will not be allowed, including at weddings, funerals and other events. With a population of 5 million people, New Zealand's among a handful of countries that have contained the spread of COVID-19 and returned to normalcy, with the last positive case due to community transmission reported around 4 months ago. New Zealand agreed to quarantine-free travel with neighbouring Australia earlier this year, as both nations had controlled the community spread of coronavirus. But fresh concerns of an outbreak have emerged after the positive test for the unnamed male Australian tourist, who visited over a dozen locations, including the National Te Papa Museum, pubs, cafes, a bookshop and a hotel during his trip over the last weekend. Passengers on flights used by the person were also asked to isolate and undergo testing, with Australia's most populous state, New South Wales, seeing its latest virus cluster grow to more than 30 cases in a week. New Zealand was prompted to pause quarantine-free travel. Australia has reported just over 30,350 cases, 910 deaths since the pandemic began. And while New Zealand recorded more than 2,300 confirmed cases and 26 deaths. In a latest update, Air New Zealand has cancelled direct services from Wellington, Christchurch and Queenstown to Sydney following the new COVID-19 cluster in Sydney. On that news, it's time for a very short break. I'll be back with more news beyond the market. Stay tuned.
This is Andy Liu broadcasting from 𝐊𝐚𝐥𝐤𝐢𝐧𝐞 Media Studio in Australia, and I'll be hosting the new 𝐊𝐚𝐥𝐤𝐢𝐧𝐞 Wellness Show. The half-hour show will cover topics from how wellness as a concept has become even more significant during COVID, to how becoming vegan may improve your health, and much more. We are excited to showcase our live streaming show to our audience of millions overseas and in Australia. Tune in to 𝐊𝐚𝐥𝐤𝐢𝐧𝐞 TV and join me.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Rachel and you're watching News Beyond the Markets. Let's look at some more news coming in from New Zealand now. The rules for how business assets are valued when they're sold as a bundle are being tightened. These updated purchase price allocation rules, which come into force on the 1st of July, apply to the sale of assets such as commercial property, forestry, land or a business. Business asset sales are a mix of taxable assets, depreciable assets like plant or machinery, and non-taxable assets like business goodwill. Generally, if the allocation includes a higher proportion of taxable and depreciable assets, then the buyer will benefit because they can claim expenses and also depreciation. But if there's a higher proportion of a non-taxable asset in the mix, the seller will benefit, as this reduces their taxable income. The new rules make it clear that both the buyer and the seller have to make the same allocation. The rules also set out the process must be followed if the buyer and seller can't agree an allocation, which includes notifying Inland Revenue. The new rules bring consistency to agreements for the disposal of acquisition and property. Energy and Resource Minister Dr. Megan Woods says that the government is preventing taxpayers picking up the bill for the decommissioning of oil fields. New proposals in a bill introduced to Parliament today will impose an explicit statutory obligation on petroleum permits and licence holders to carry out and fund decommissioning of petroleum fields. It will apply to current and future permit and licence holders, and the obligation to fund decommissioning will be extended to former permit and licence holders if a permit is transferred after the bill is enacted. These proposals will strengthen regulatory framework and build on the changes to the Crown Minerals Act made in February 2019. This bill takes a long-term view that requires petroleum permit and licence holders to make payments towards any future remediation. Decommissioning fields is an issue government are grappling all the world over with as they transition away from fossil fuels. As New Zealand's oil and gas fields approach the end of their productive lives, it's imperative to have a regime that is up to the job. Regulations to support changes in the bill are likely to be consulted in the coming months so that they can come into effect as soon as practicable after the bill is passed. It's anticipated that the bill will be passed in late 2021. Let's take a short break now, and next we'll be looking at the world of sports.
At 𝐊𝐴𝐴 TV, we'll take you to the heart of the Australian equity market. We'll bring you breakthrough stories that highlight volatility, as well as tailwinds building across the length and breadth of markets. Whether space travel will gain momentum, while economies may gradually open amid vaccine rollouts, our experts will share their timely inputs. So join us on this exciting journey of live streaming, financial and stock market news. 𝐊𝐴𝐴 TV.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Rachel and you're watching News Beyond the Markets. Let us now look at some news from the world of sports. Melbourne City will host the A-League final on Sunday in front of fans at Melbourne Rectangular Stadium. Authorities in the Victoria state, of which Melbourne is the capital, had approved the grand final in front of a 50% capacity crowd of 15,000 as COVID-19 restrictions ease in the southern city after a recent outbreak. City was stripped of home advantage in the semi-finals over the weekend due to the restrictions, a decision that angered fans, but City managed to beat Macarthur FC 2-0 in Sydney on Sunday to give themselves a chance to avenge last year's 1-0 loss in the 2020 grand final. A-League boss Greg O'Rourke says in a statement on Wednesday that the evolving restrictions have prevented ongoing challenges on every front. This announcement means that Melbourne City are deservedly able to play a grand final at home in front of a raucous crowd. The A-League's decision follows an outbreak of COVID-19 in Sydney in recent days. Authorities on Wednesday tightened restrictions on gatherings and movement of people in Sydney for a week over fears the latest cluster of the highly infectious Delta variant could get out of control. Sydney FC players rushed to pack their bags late on Tuesday and were moved to hotels outside of COVID hot zones in Sydney to avoid fresh curbs on travel to Melbourne. Sydney FC will beat Adelaide United 2-1 in the first semi-final on Saturday, are bidding for a record-extending 6th A-League title. That's all for now. Stay tuned on Kalkine TV with more live market updates. We'll be back with more news on the markets, economy, diverse themes and sectors. I'm Rachel, signing off for now.